Questions orales. Oral questions. L'honorable chef.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Bloc Québécois once again freaked out because I quoted René Lévesque. René Lévesque and Lucien Bouchard were real sovereigntists, but they wouldn't have asked Quebecers to spend $500 billion more for the federal government. They wouldn't have voted to add 100,000 more public servants. They wouldn't have voted to increase taxes on Quebecers. Will the Prime Minister finally finalize the Bloc Liberal coalition? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers understand the importance of climate action. They understand the importance of a strong child care system. They understand the importance of a government that can manage its own programs. But the Conservatives only understand one thing: cuts, cuts, cuts. They want to cut programs that Quebecers care about and the public servants who are working hard for them. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. We will cut taxes, Mr. Speaker. It is odd that a so-called sovereigntist party loves sending Quebecers money to Ottawa. They must not care about the sovereignty of Quebecers' wallets, Mr. Speaker. They are voting for taxes. And when we propose to leave money in Quebecers' pockets and let them decide what to do with it, the Bloc Québécois has decided to vote with their boss, the Liberal Party. Why not give more freedom to Quebecers? Freedom to decide what to do with their money and cut taxes. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Quebec nation and Quebecers understand very well the importance of social solidarity. They understand that social solidarity rests on social programs. And that is why we need revenue to build those programs. That is why Éric Girard agrees to raise the rate on capital gains, but the Conservatives disagree because they are against people.
Mr. Speaker, last week the health minister went into a wacko rant accusing parents who take their kids on a road trip of locking them up in a car for 10 days straight without a washroom break, causing the whole world to burn.
Unbelievable.
All because we proposed that the government take taxes off gas so that Canadians could have a summer break. Will this health minister break into the same hysteria over his boss's use of a gas-guzzling private jet to vacation all around the world?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we face an existential crisis in climate change. The Conservative solution, you'd have to drive. I was wrong, and I admit it. It wasn't 37,000 kilometers. It was 44,000 kilometers to get the benefit that they're talking about. And what they want to do is cut not only dental care, not only cut child care, not only cut pharmacare, but end our climate action and return to the days when the Conservative Party would go into climate conferences and attack the action the world was taking to save our planet. I will stand for climate change, and so will this party, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, his wacko math gets even worse. He's talking about vacations of 44,000 kilometers. Those are the vacations his boss takes in a taxpayer-funded, fuel-guzzling private jet. The vacations for which Conservatives want to give Canadians a break is to a local campground where they can support the local economy. We know Canadians can't go abroad. All they can do is get in their small vehicle and have a small break. Why won't the government take the tax off so that they can afford to do that?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that we have, in fact, underestimated the wacko math of the Conservative Party of Canada. According to Sarah Hastings-Simon, an associate professor at the University of Calgary Faculty of Science, and she crunched the numbers, the alleged numbers of the Conservative Party based on the savings, and her calculation, someone would have to drive 44,000 kilometers, not 37,000 kilometers, Mr. Speaker. 44, so you could, in fact, drive from the North Pole to the South Pole and back, and you would have some kilometers left. These are the type of mathematics that these people are doing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, if that particular minister had his way, Canadians wouldn't even be allowed to drive to the grocery store because he wants to abolish roads. He says we should not fund any more roads and then has the audacity to call other people wacko. Most Canadians don't want to put on an orange jumpsuit or climb a building. They just want to take their kids for a merciful break from this miserable, broken economy. So will the government accept our common sense plan to take the tax off gas and diesel so Canadians can have a summer?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
You can't, in fact, drive from the North Pole to the South Pole. There are no roads. I'm sure they'll find ways to blame me for that. Leave alone the fact that there are two oceans. But if you were to drive from Canada's most northern city, accessible by road, Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories, and then you drove to the most southern city, accessible by road, Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, you would have to drive 16,000 kilometers at an average speed of 100 kilometers an hour without stopping. It would be 60 hours, Mr. Speaker, and you're only halfway to the savings claimed by the Conservative Party of Canada.
L'honorable député de La Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the member for Alfred Pellan is putting forward the idea of making English an official language of Quebec. But he's not the first Liberal to suggest that, even though the idea was criticized. Who already suggested this kind of thing in 2016? The Prime Minister. In 2016, he said that the city of Ottawa shouldn't become bilingual because Gatineau on the Quebec side is unilingual. So he was opposed to bilingualism for Franco-Ontarians if Quebec wasn't ready to make English an official language. He had to apologize and say that he'd overstepped. Will he ask the member for Alfred Pellan to do the same thing? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, there's a great deal of hypocrisy in what we hear from the Bloc Québécois here. First of all, we brought forward an incredibly ambitious action plan to strengthen the status of French. And yet, the Bloc Québécois voted against it. And then in Budget 2024, we are massively investing to make our official languages really equal. And what did the Bloc Québécois do? It voted against it, once again. So the Bloc Québécois should at least have the courage of its convictions. The Bloc Québécois should admit that it says one thing and does the exact opposite. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The Liberals, there's a whole string of problems in their party when it comes to French. For example, the member for Glengarry Prescott Russell thinks that worrying about the decline of French is extremists and full of it. And the member from Mont-Royal said that applying Bill 101 to federally regulated businesses would be a shame. Or the member for Saint Laurent said that Bill 96 would prevent Anglophones from accessing health care. It's nonsense. Why can't the Liberals talk about the French language without this kind of ridiculous discourse? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Well, what's ridiculous is my colleague's question, who voted against the budget, which is investing money to defend English and French, who voted against the official languages plan. And let me just say one thing. Being a sovereigntist doesn't make him more of a Quebecer than the Liberal members for Quebec and even the Conservative members for Quebec. There are Quebecers who are not sovereigntists, who are proud Quebecers, proud Anglophones, proud Francophones, and who will always stand up for Quebec no matter what the Bloc does.
The Honourable Member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it has been 5 years since the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls released its 231 calls for justice. Only 2 are fully implemented, and the Liberals continue to ignore this ongoing genocide. Commissioners who led this inquiry are giving this government a failing grade. Rates of violence are up. Families are left looking for answers. 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and things are getting worse. Will the Liberals stop stalling and implement the calls for justice to save lives now?
The Honourable Minister for Crown and Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First off, let me thank the member from Winnipeg Centre for her constant advocacy on this issue. Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit and gender diverse people in Canada are 12 times more likely to go missing or be murdered compared to their non-Indigenous counterpart. Urgent action is needed to improve safety, justice, and dismantle systemic racism. Today, we tabled the 2023-2024 Federal Pathway Annual Progress Report, noting funding for 52 community safety projects, 9 safety plans, 47 shelters, and a pilot red dress alert system. Progress includes better health services, expanded internet for over 25,000 Indigenous.
L'Honorable, the Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Despite promising to do so 3 months ago, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has failed to issue a notice to exporters telling them that they cannot sell weapons to Netanyahu's government. As Palestinians are starving, as violence in the West Bank escalates, and as UN experts are calling for the recognition of Palestine, the Liberals won't act to stop a genocide. Peace requires action. Justice requires action. Two-way arms embargo, sanctions on Netanyahu's war cabinet, recognition of Palestine. When will the minister stop with their empty words and take action?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, the situation in Gaza is absolutely catastrophic, and that's why we need the violence to stop. We need an immediate ceasefire, and that is why Canada fully supports the proposal by the President of the United States. We need to take a chance on peace, and along with our allies, we're following very closely what my colleague just mentioned, because our position has been clear when it comes to arms export, and we'll take decisions accordingly. Thank you so much.
The Honourable Member from Peterborough Kawartha.
The level of hypocrisy on that side of the House is nothing short of astonishing. The Prime Minister is literally jet-setting around the world on his gas-fueled jet. And the Health Minister says, you know what, kids, you can't go on a family trip because it will cause the planet to burn. We have the simplest common sense motion right now that will save Ontario families $592. That might mean nothing to them, but it means a lot. So will they listen, have some compassion, and axe the tax so families can make memories and enjoy their time together?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Except that the savings that the Conservative Party of Canada is claiming are simply not true, Mr. Speaker. Let me quote Dan McTeague, a former Liberal MP but a vocal opponent to our policies, and including carbon pricing, and no fan of mine, I might add, Mr. Speaker. He said when asked about that proposal from the Conservative Party, he said, and I quote, "I'm in the wilderness, Mr. Speaker." He said that there's no way that the savings that they're claiming, and he's at the head of the Canadians for Affordable Energy, there's no way that the savings that they're claiming are true, one. And number two, it would cost the government billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. So where are they going to cut, Mr.
The Honourable Member from Peterborough Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, nobody believes a word that side of the House says. They have completely lost trust in Canadians. They've caused chaos. They've caused crime. They've caused complete despair. Despair. People are using food banks at the highest record level they've ever used in their life. Nobody believes what they're saying. 35 cents a litre at the pumps. Do you know what that will save? Cost to ship the food. It will allow families to actually feed their families, and most importantly, will take off the stress that is creating mental health crises in this country. So while they stand over there and say that, we will fight for this. Will they?
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague led her question saying that nobody believes what anyone in the government has to say. It's not us who's saying it. Mr. Speaker, one of the people who spent tens of thousands of dollars to take Conservative MPs on a junket to London to wine and dine them so they would be his mouthpiece in this chamber is saying that he's lost in the wilderness. Mr. Speaker, there are academics who have studied their proposal, the cost savings they say will accrue to families, that would say you had to go to the North Pole, to the South Pole, and back in order to make that a reality. She started her question before, Mr. Speaker, talking about hypocrisy. I'd remind her once again she votes against the measures that she shows up for the announcements for in her riding.
The honourable member from Foothills.
This NDP Liberal Prime Minister loves to jet set around the world on his luxury vacations, but then stick the taxpayers with the bill. Yep. Meanwhile, the Liberal Health Minister is telling Canadians you cannot take a summer vacation or the planet will burn. This hypocrisy is ridiculous, and it's just not true. Conservatives have a common sense plan to axe all federal gas taxes until Labor Day, ensuring that Canadians can take their families on a summer vacation. Will the Liberal NDP Prime Minister stop his hypocrisy, stop his radical policies, axe the tax so Canadians can take their summer holiday?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe it's the definition of a family road trip. I mean, for me, a family road trip is a few hundred kilometers. For the Conservatives, it's 44,000 kilometers in order to realize the benefit that they're selling. That's a pretty big difference. But I'll tell you, well, they were spending the weekend trying to cut YouTube clips for Instagram or Facebook so that they could try to misrepresent an issue as important as climate change. I can tell you, I was talking to the seniors that they want to deny dental care to. I was talking to the people who need pharmacare. And of course, their focus, Mr. Speaker, is on not facts, but in misrepresenting issues, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
Here's the facts, Mr. Speaker. I was at a seniors' home in Claresholm this weekend where they're seeing their rent increase 5% to cover the cost of the carbon tax. Wow. This is forcing seniors to make very difficult choices, either stay in their home, afford food, or find other accommodations. Those are the facts. Common sense Conservatives are putting forward a plan that will save 35 cents a litre for Canadians. This will save Alberta families $955 this summer. Will the out-of-touch Liberals support the common sense Conservative plan to axe the tax so Canadians can take a well-deserved summer vacation with their family?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
You know what is really hypocritical, Mr. Speaker? It is running on Erin O'Toole's carbon tax plan and then doing a 180-degree pivot. But let's talk about some stuff we can agree on. I think we all agree we want the Oilers to win the Stanley Cup. And I think we can all agree that Danielle Smith is a true blue Conservative. So how do the Conservatives reconcile that with the fact that she has raised the tax on gas by 13 cents a litre?
L'honorable député de...
The honourable member from Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, it's beautiful weather today. Parents will want to organize trips for their kids and have some good family time. But unfortunately, this Prime Minister's inflationary spending supported by the Bloc Québécois means that 54% of households have changed their plans because of the cost of living. People don't want to pay more at the pump like this radical bloc wants. They want to pay less and have more fun. Will the Prime Minister help the 65% of Quebecers who will be road tripping this summer in their car? Will the Liberals vote to suspend federal gas taxes over the summer? Yes or no? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives don't seem to understand basic math. So between Matane and Baton Rouge, it's 2,800 kilometers, like it says in the song. That's about 30 hours of driving. So to get from Matane to Baton Rouge, well, you'd actually have to make that trip about 4 times. As I'm pointing out each individual time, about 5 times. That would be your road trip. This is complete nonsense.
L'honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Well, Mr. Speaker, people can't even get to Matane in the first place because of these liberal taxes. The Minister of Health really missed the boat last week and blamed kids. He said, I have good news for kids. They'll be able to have fun on their summer vacation. They'll be stuck in a car for 10 days in a row with no bathroom breaks. I'm sure they'll enjoy that while the planet is burning. Instead of attacking kids and parents, will the Prime Minister call his minister to order and vote for our common sense motion of suspending the gas tax over the summer? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, in order to benefit from the savings that the Conservative Party is claiming, you would have to drive 320 hours over the holidays. I don't know how much time the Conservatives think that people have for their vacation. I'm talking about 320 hours in a row driving, no bathroom breaks, no time to go look at the landscape. It's complete nonsense. It's really quite something.
L'honorable député de Pointe-de-l'Île.
The honourable member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, once again, I'm going to come back to the Liberal slip-ups on the French language. Last week, the member for Alfred Pélan was promoting the idea of making English an official language in Quebec. Of course, all the parties in the National Assembly denounced this idea. Even the Liberals at the provincial level, they said that this was an attack on the legacy of Robert Bourassa. But in this parliament, not a single Liberal member has stood up to criticize the member for Alfred Pélan's idea. Silence equals consent in this case. Will someone finally stand up to say that this is wrong? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Well, I'll tell you what we're saying on this side of the House. We stand up for French, for bilingualism, for the Anglophone minority in Quebec, for the Francophone minority outside Quebec. We stand up for two strong languages. We will stand up to defend Quebec within Canada, unlike the Bloc Québécois, who do nothing other than foster division and cast petty blame around. They didn't even support the official languages action plan. It is deeply, deeply hypocritical. The honourable member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. There isn't one single red cent more for French in this official languages action plan, and there's only one francophone location in North America, just one, but that's one too many for the member for Alfred Pélan, who wants us to make English an official language. Let me repeat that for people sitting in the back. If we want Canada to be bilingual, then Quebec needs to be francophone. Let me repeat again as well. There's only one official language which is threatened in Canada and in Quebec. That's French. So why do the Liberals always want to bring in more Anglicization measures? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, we know that Quebec is a francophone province. We have always recognized that, and we've always defended it. We will continue to do that. If my colleague had even bothered to read the action plan for official languages, he would see that there's money for French. And if he had even bothered to read the budget, maybe it would have dawned on him that he's voting against the very things he claims to stand up for. I want some consistency here. Does he want more to protect French? He should have voted for the official languages action plan, or he should have voted for the budget. The honourable member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. This is complete balderdash, Mr. Speaker, and we don't have to wait even for the member for Alfred Pélan's dream to come true if we want to see English become stronger in Quebec, because the Liberals are already doing so much to promote that. The Office québécois de la langue française revealed that when it comes to the right to levels continue, the Liberals are already acting as if English were an official language in Quebec. Is that why they're defending their colleague for Alfred Pélan? The Honourable Minister for Official Languages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member across the way knows very well, our new legislation on modernizing the Official Languages Act clearly states that French is declining in Canada. I'm from Alberta. I studied in French on the Saint-Jean campus, and thanks to
made the ludicrous statement that made the ludicrous statement that families enjoying road trips are somehow complicit in letting the planet burn. Mr. Speaker, this is just another example of this government's golden rule. Do as I say, not as I do. Canada's Conservatives have presented an option. Remove the tax on fuel so Canadians can afford to put fuel in their tanks and food on their tables. Mr. Speaker, will this Liberal NDP Prime Minister come out of the ivory tower and please vote yes so Canadians can afford basics and maybe even a summer getaway?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, I have a really hard time believing that suddenly the Conservatives have an interest in doing what's best on behalf of Canadian families. If that was the case, Mr. Speaker, they would have supported the Canada Child Benefit, which I will say will be indexed to inflation next month, supporting Canadian families even more. They would have supported moving forward with early learning and childcare at $10 a day in enabling more parents to get back to work. Mr. Speaker, their actions are not matching their words.
The Honourable Member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, 1 in 3 Canadians can access the childcare. The rhetoric needs to stop. Today, this government has an opportunity to vote on our common sense Conservative motion to provide a temporary measure of relief for Canadians, $100 that the government will leave in the bank accounts of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister allow Canadians to have a simple getaway and vote in favour of the motion? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, quite the contrary to what we just heard. We know that 750,000 Canadian families are now able to access affordable, inclusive, accessible childcare through our childcare plan. That's translated into thousands of dollars of savings each and every year for Canadian families. We'll continue to work with the provinces and territories to ensure more spaces are created. But this is how we help Canadian families, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Bow River.
Thank you. After 9 years as NDP Liberal government, Canadians are being squeezed for every last penny, like Tammy in my riding. Families are paying hundreds every month on a tax plan that hasn't hit a single target. While Liberal ministers get chauffeured around town, they lecture Canadians that the planet will burn for driving to work or going to school, driving the kids to school. Will the Prime Minister quit exploiting families for trying to get by and cut the carbon tax catastrophe and vote for the common sense Conservative plan to help Canadians this summer by axing the tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, here are the facts. Albertans get the most in Canada carbon rebate, and there's a rural top-up that's going to double thanks to our budget. Mr. Speaker, guess what? Not only that, but when we had a minor increase in the price on pollution this year, guess who increased the price of fuel by 13 cents? The Premier of the province of Alberta, Danielle Smith, and guess what she did? No rebate, $0 back. The Canada carbon rebate puts more money in the pockets of Albertans, while Danielle Smith and those Conservatives do absolutely nothing.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the housing crisis is a source of intense stress for many people. There is a shortage of affordable houses and apartments. For years, Liberals and Conservatives have abandoned truly affordable housing. Experts tell us that federal buildings could alleviate the crisis by being converted into housing. It's a good idea, but people will have to actually be able to pay the rent. Can the Liberals guarantee that 100% of available federal land and buildings will be used for social and affordable housing? The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to thank my colleagues for their concern and their building of affordable housing. I've shared why we've created an acceleration fund for housing, which goes through, notably, an agreement with Quebec that is building 8,000 affordable housing units. We have the opportunity to use public land to create affordable housing. I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues to establish the details and to build a lot of housing in the future for our country.
The honourable member from Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, while a record number of families are turning to food banks, grocery CEOs have never been richer. The Liberals aren't cracking down on the corporate greed driving up food prices, and as for the Conservatives, they wouldn't dare touch the profits of their CEO donors. Canadians deserve better. The NDP is giving the Liberals a chance to put an end to corporate greed by making rich CEOs pay what they owe so that we can invest that money back into Canadians. Will the Liberals vote in favour of our motion to make rich grocery CEOs pay what they owe?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
I'd like to thank the colleague for the question. In fact, we all recognize in this country that, families are having a hard time when it comes to grocery, Mr. Speaker. That's why we've acted. In fact, with the Minister of Finance, we presented to this nation the largest revamp of our competition law in the country. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? The Conservative voted against, Those are the ones who are standing and saying they want to help family. They voted against. Mr. Speaker, if they want to do something to help us, they should stand with us and ask Costco and Walmart to sign the Grocery Code of Conduct. That's the best way to bring fairness in this country. We'll keep pushing, and I hope they're going to join us in that endeavor, Mr. Speaker.
Answer.
L'honorable député de Sudbury.
Mr. Speaker, today marks the 5th anniversary of the National Inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2 LGBTQIA+ peoples. A reminder of the deep-seated and systemic violence faced by Indigenous peoples. It is not just a time to reflect on the past, but to assess our work towards meaningful change. Can the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations provide an update on the progress made in implementing the calls for justice?
The Honourable Minister for Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I just came from the front lawn of Parliament Hill where I heard from Bridget Tolley. Her mother was stolen from her over 20 years ago, and she has been seeking justice ever since. This is the story of many Indigenous families and survivors across this country. On this 5th anniversary of the National Inquiry, we stand with people like Bridget. While there's a lot of work to do, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to ensure that each and every call to justice is fulfilled. I thank the member for Sudbury for this question.
The Honourable Member from Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, never before has so much been spent to achieve so little. Despite having doubled the national debt, today Statistics Canada confirmed that GDP per capita has fallen again for the 6th time in 7 quarters. Under this Prime Minister, Canadians have seen one of the steepest falls in the standard of living in our history. Why is this Prime Minister spending so much to make Canadians so poor?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives just can't resist talking Canada down. That's why we are not hearing from them about inflation. For 4 months in a row, being within the Bank of Canada's target range, and in April, the lowest it has been in 3 years, at 2.7%. That is why we are not hearing from them that last year Canada attracted the most foreign direct investment per capita in the entire G7. The other thing we're not hearing from them is all the programs they're going to cut, starting with the National School Food Program.
The Honourable Member from Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
The fact of the matter is that a Canadian standard of living is declining. In the United States, GDP per capita has grown more than 8% since 2019. Right. Our economy is now underperforming the United States by the widest margin since 1965.
Right.
Well, under this Prime Minister, his government has grown morbidly obese. More Canadians are visiting food banks than ever before. This is economic malpractice. Why is the Prime Minister spending so much to make Canadians so poor?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, yet again, these Conservatives are relentlessly talking Canada down and concealing their austerity agenda. The reality is Canada has added 1.3 million more jobs than we had before the pandemic. The Canadian economy is 104% the size it was before the pandemic, a rate of growth second in the G7 only to the United States. And Mr. Speaker, we have preserved our AAA credit rating with a stable outlook.
The honourable member from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes.
Speaker, the latest number from Stats Canada shows that under this Liberal government, Canadians have seen one of the steepest falls in living standards in our country's history. This means our quality of life has now dropped to the same level it was 8 years ago, while the unemployment rate is up from last year. After 9 years of this Liberal government, Canadians are worse off. They're working twice as hard to take in half as much. In fact, Canada's economy has stagnated, and Liberal policy is to blame. So why is the Prime Minister spending so much to make Canadians so poor?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, it's amazing to hear the Conservative talking down Canadians, Canada, and our prospect, Mr. Speaker. Around the world, Mr. Speaker, people are talking about Canada. You know what? As my colleague said before, we have received the largest level of investment, Mr. Speaker, in our economy. You know why? Because we have the best workers in the world, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
Because we have renewable energy. Because we have trade agreement with our G7 partners, Mr. Speaker.
Right.
Because we know what to make things in this country, Mr. Speaker. And while they talk down Canada on this side of the House, we will keep pumping up Canada, we'll keep improving for this country, and we'll bring jobs in this country.
The honourable member from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes.
Speaker, the Liberals are ruining the economy. Production of made-in-Canada goods and services has declined for the fourth straight quarter, the latest drop by 0.7% in the first 3 months of this year. Canada remains last of 37 market-based countries that haven't recovered from before the pandemic. In fact, Canada underperforms the American economy by the widest margin since 1965. And sadly, Canada's economy continues to stagnate under this Prime Minister's uncontrolled spending and punishing taxes. So why is the Prime Minister spending so much to make Canadians so poor?
The Honourable Minister for International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I would like the honourable member to talk to the hundreds upon hundreds of Canadian companies who have come with me to many markets around the world where we have excellent trade agreements, where they are taking their services, they are taking their goods, they are taking their innovations, they are taking their creations, and they are selling Canada around the world. And you know what they're doing in doing that? They're creating jobs. They're creating jobs from coast to coast to coast. We need to keep talking up the Canadian economy and Canadian businesses, and we're doing this on this side of the House, and I want to know why you're not.
I'm certain the Honourable Minister wasn't referring to the Speaker, but I would encourage all members. Please, to ensure that the questions and answers are directed through the Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Avignon-La Métis, Matane-Matapédia. The cost of natural disasters is increasing every year as a result of climate change. We need to ask ourselves whether taxpayers should foot the entire bill or whether it would be better to make major responsible players pay for part of it. The state of Vermont has just passed a law to make oil companies pay for damage caused by climate change. This should be an inspiration to Canada, since oil companies are the main emitters of greenhouse gases and are making record profits from pollution. Then why not force them to compensate financially for adapting to climate change? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her question. And that, contrary to the Conservatives, she believes in the importance of fighting climate change. I would like to remind her that we are the only G20 country that has gone after oil and gas. We're the only ones to have done so. We've announced a $530 million fund with the Canada Federation of Municipalities that is devoted in working with our communities. It will help 1,400 communities to fight against climate change. The Honourable Member for Avignon-La Métis, Matane-Matapédia. On one side of the border, Vermont is passing a law to force all companies to pay for climate damage. And on the other side of the border are the Liberals and the NDP, who just last week voted to give $30 billion in additional tax breaks to these same oil companies. Whilst Vermont wants to force them to pay for the damage they caused, Canada is rewarding them. I thought the Liberals were in favour of the polluter pays principle. Why is it the polluter does not pay principle with oil companies? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite the contrary, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 2 years, we've added a standard on clean fuel, what the Conservatives committed to doing last election, but then they flip-flopped. We also fought against emissions. We are currently putting a ceiling on greenhouse gas emissions for oil and gas, the only big oil-producing country in the world to do so. Our emissions are so low that the last time they were so low in Canada was just after the Canadians won the Stanley Cup. So it's been a long time. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Levis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of this Liberal government, it's crisis after crisis after crisis. Homelessness, drugs, street gangs, gun violence. This is what 2/3 of Montrealers think of their city. A social disorder caused by the Bloc Québécois, which supported Bill C-5 to keep criminals at home instead of in prison. It's costing Quebecers dearly in terms of safety. When will the Bloc-supported Prime Minister stop imposing misery upon Quebecers? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Informing Canadians is a basic condition when it comes to being a politician. The Conservative leaders just a few days ago informed the people of my riding that dental care does not exist. But 2 million Canadians, including several thousand in my colleague's riding, who have been able to get dental care. 60% of Quebec dental care providers have already signed up, and now we've heard that on the 16th of June, under 18s and people living with disabilities will also be able to get this dental care. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Levis. Mr. Speaker, Montrealers can't take it anymore. On their doorstep, in their daycare, on the doorstep of their businesses, they find used syringes and human excrement on the ground. Here's a result of the Black Liberal Alliance, $500 billion in crazy spending that has contributed to this homelessness crisis. Budget chaos, social chaos, Mr. Speaker. Can this Bloc-supported Prime Minister stop wasting Quebecers' money so they can return to safer cities? The Honourable Minister for Regional Development in Quebec. I'm pleased that my colleague is interested in Montreal. As a member from Montreal, I'm a member for Hochelaga, and there is a crisis which is called homelessness, and we're working against this every single day. On this side of the House, we're implementing programs against which they always vote. And so if they truly cared about the most vulnerable in our society, they should perhaps start by voting for our programs that will help homelessness. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years under this government, it's clear that the Prime Minister and the Bloc Québécois are not worth the cost. Violence between street gangs is getting worse in this country, and they're in our prisons. An article in Le Quotidien reports that guards at the Roberval prison are threatened and intimidated on a daily basis by members of the mafia. Instead of protecting them, the Bloc is helping the cause by giving 100% support to the Prime Minister's policies, which have caused chaos across the country. Mr. Speaker, when will the Bloc and the Liberals listen to us and protect Canadians instead of allowing violence to reign? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Quite the contrary, Mr. Speaker. We are working with Correctional Services Canada, to use the example put forward by my colleague, exactly to make sure that those who work in our prisons are safe. I had the privilege with my colleague, the Minister for Public Services and Procurement, to visit prison in order to talk to staff to see what improvements we could bring to their workplace to guarantee their safety. I met the union that represents correctional officers and will continue to do what is necessary. The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, whilst the Conservatives continue to deny the realities of climate change, but also the impact of climate change, and that have absolutely no plan to tackle this crisis. We are making the necessary investments to guarantee a future to our children, a green and prosperous future for our future generations. Can a Minister for the Environment let us know what these investments are that will protect our environment and guarantee a future for our children? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question, but also for her work on this matter. We want more sustainable and resilient communities. That is a priority for our government against climate change, to help us plan towns and municipalities of the future. And that is why this morning, with the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, we announced $530 million, a new fund that is earmarked for resiliency and adaptation to climate change, which will allow 1,400 communities to better ready themselves for climate change.
Bravo. The Honourable Member from Calgary-Midnapore.
Tomorrow, the Auditor General will table her report on McKinsey. Now, the Liberals will try to hide their preferential treatment of McKinsey, but the procurement watchdog already said that this government creates criteria specifically designed for McKinsey. The Minister of Procurement also signed a $5.7 million sole source contract, despite her officials asking her not to, for McKinsey. Wow. At a time where Canadians can't even take a summer vacation, why is its government so hell-bent on giving $116 million to McKinsey?
Good question. The Honourable Minister for les Travaux Publics et Approvisionnement Canada.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Très enchanté de...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to answering this question. My colleague knows full well that the Auditor General's work is very important, but also very appreciated by the Canadian government. We look forward to hearing their report tomorrow. We know that their report will continue to help us so we can go even further in the important work that we must all do to make sure that public services are delivered in a good and opportune way. And for the dental care system that is working very well, especially in Quebec.
The Honourable Member from Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Corruption, abuse, resignations, multiple investigations, and at least $150 million tax dollars illegally given out by Liberal insiders to other Liberal insiders and to themselves. That's Sustainable Development Technologies Canada after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government and that Prime Minister that's just not worth the cost. The Auditor General is set to release a damning report on SDTC tomorrow. So will the Prime Minister shut down the billion-dollar slush fund? Will he commit to get Canadians their money back? And will he guarantee Canadians that none of these corrupt executives will get $1 of severance?
Not $1.
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. In fact, as you well know, Mr. Speaker, from the moment we received allegation, we started an investigation, Mr. Speaker, in order to make sure that we would uncover the truth and we would restore governance. We suspended funding of the organization. We now got a report. The chairwoman resigned. The CEO of the organization resigned, Mr. Speaker. We welcome the findings of the Auditor General. We proactively work with the Auditor General. And one thing I can reassure all Canadians, we will restore governance, restore funding for this organization that is helping thousands of Canadians, companies in this country.
L'honorable député de Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After the member for Saint-Laurent who denied the decline of French in Quebec, a Franco-Ontarian MP who called witnesses at the Languages Committee what we all heard on Parleview. Now it's a turn for the Quebec MP for Alfred Pélin to say in committee that Quebec should be bilingual to be stronger. The true face of the Quebec Liberal caucus has just been unmasked. They have no will or intention of stopping the decline of French and protecting it. Will the Prime Minister act now for French in Quebec and bring his MPs to order? The Honourable Minister for Fisheries and Oceans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Someone pinch me. I must be dreaming when I hear my colleagues across the way talk about French. The Conservative Party and the Francophones of Quebec in that party accused me here in the House of speaking French and too often speaking in French. And now they're all up in arms about the complete opposite? Mr. Speaker, we need to try and figure out where they're going, because they seem to be going in all sorts of directions.
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order.
The honourable member from Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, as we entered into June and summer is just around the corner, the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre has already reported that over 300,000 hectares of forest have been burned down. Climate change continues to impact communities in my province of British Columbia and across Canada at a disproportionate.
Colleagues, I'm having great trouble hearing from both sides on hearing the question from the honourable member from Richmond Centre. For those who would like to have their For
those who would like to have their conversations, I would encourage you to have them behind the curtains or in the antechambers. Until then, the honourable member for Richmond Centre.
I'll invite him to start from the top, please. The honourable member from Richmond Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we entered into June and summer is just around the corner, the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre has already reported that over 300,000 hectares of forest have been burned down. Climate change continues to impact communities in my province of British Columbia and across Canada at a disproportionate rate. Drought and warmer than normal temperature are persisting, fueling the severity of wildfires and posing significant risks of our communities. Can the Minister of Emergency Preparedness share with Canadians what work our federal government is doing to help community to be better prepared?
The Honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness.
Mr. Speaker, extreme weather events is increasing the frequency and severity of natural disasters, but often I hear my colleagues across the floor downplay or even deny the reality of climate change and its effect on Canadians. They would rather claim that wildfires are caused by arson. Mr. Speaker, last year 59% of Canada's wildfires were the result of lightning strikes. We owe it to the Canadians impacted and the thousands who were already displaced this year to acknowledge the reality of climate change. Our government has invested more than $10 billion to help communities better prepare and adapt to climate change, and we are proudly continuing our work to limit our emissions. Thank you.
The honourable member from Timmins, James Bay.
Corporations shouldn't be allowed to lie about the threats that are posed by their products. That's a no-brainer, unless, of course, we're talking about big oil. So last week, a front group for the oil and gas industry was found guilty of running a massive disinformation campaign on the supposed benefits of burning even more fossil fuels. The planet is on fire. People are getting sick, and yet this Liberal government have never taken on the lies and greenwashing of big oil. So to the Minister of Environment, what's it going to take to end this massively funded disinformation campaign by the fossil fuel industry?
The Honourable Minister for Industry.
Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague. We obviously expect the highest level of governance from corporations that are operating in Canada. But, Mr. Speaker, that gives me also the opportunity to remind Canadians of the investment we've seen in green supply chain in this country, Mr. Speaker. As we said before, this country has received a record number of investment in the green industry, Mr. Speaker. Even Bloomberg ranked Canada first in the world for the battery ecosystem, Mr. Speaker, ahead of China. We should all be proud of these investments, which are generational. They're creating jobs, they're creating prosperity, and they're putting Canada ahead of every nation when it comes to building EV in the world.
That's right.
The honourable member for Richmond, Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, Immigration Canada establishes average processing times for applications. But here's the reality. A constituent of mine asked us to check his visitor record application, which was submitted on March the 4th. The official told us that the application was still being processed and that the average processing time was 77 days, which would take us to the 20th of May. So we called back on the 21st of May, just to be told that the time limit was now 84 days, which would take us to the 27th of May. We called back on the 28th of May and are told to call back after the 1st of June because the lead times are now more than 89 days. Mr. Speaker, how can the government operate with this kind of rule? The Honourable Minister for Fisheries and Oceans. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, and I'll be pleased to advise the Minister for Immigration of the matter so we can find an answer to for our colleague.
And so brings to an end of question period. Comme il est 15h14.
It being